So this one is going to be a pretty quick one here. This is our final chapter of Unit 4 here. This was a very quick, like just 10 slides in our Unit 4 presentation, and I think we covered it in like maybe a half hour. I'm hoping to cut that in half, if not a third here. Let's see if we can keep this under 15 minutes here. All right, that's our stretch goal for this. Okay, so this unit here, this is going to deal with specifically the idea of the society of the South before the Civil War. So basically, taking a look here specifically at the way African Americans were treated, enslaved people, and their lot in life, kind of the economic system that led to that happening, and why sectional tension is arising so much right now, if you believe the irreconcilable argument here. Revisionist? Yeah. Nah. Anyways, so let's take a look here. Now, some of this is going to be review from Unit 3 here, but what we do remember is that per that transportation revolution that kind of made the American system possible, we see that there was a lot of steamboats and innovations like canals being made. But one that we did not get to in Unit 3 was there is now an advent of railroads. And you can see a giant map right there of all the different types of railroads and the areas that they meet. And so what we see is that there is a huge influx of railroads being built in the 1850s specifically. And so it means that commerce is now moving faster than ever. The North is trading with the West far more easily. So the West is kind of coming into its own now as an area that is more than just an agricultural kind of depot. It is now becoming a full-fledged area of the country in really every way. It's industrializing now. It is becoming an easy place to get to with these trains. And there are now major cities there like Chicago. So really, there is a lot that makes it effectively its own area. But at the same time, what we are seeing is that a lot of these innovations are kind of leaving the South stuck in time. So really, what we saw is that, like, one, there's a lot less train routes down there, as you can see, but two, the industrialization happening in the North and now the West is simply not happening in the South. There is a lot of people in the South that argue they don't even need that kind of reform there. They don't need to make industrialization happen because they're doing just fine without it. We'll see more about how that goes in a sec here. All right. Now, at the same time, the economy of the South is entirely based on slave labor. And we'll see how that goes in a second. Part of it is the fact that there are now more enslaved people than ever, even though the Constitutional Convention banned the international slave trade in the year 1808. The domestic slave trade has never slowed down and, in fact, only got stronger from Unit 2 onwards here. And so, part of what we see here is that there is now a self-perpetuating system economically, but also enslaved people are an entire demographic here. There is 4 million enslaved people in the South, which is a third of the entire South. And so naturally, this demographic is having kids, is reproducing. Sojourner Truth mentioned she had 13 kids herself. So the reason the slave population is going up is because of natural enslaved people just having families and reproducing the same reason anyone else would. And so it means, unfortunately, there is a lot of labor for a lot of hands. And on that note, let's take a look and review cotton. So we saw in Unit 3 that cotton is now the defining economic feature of really the entire US, but especially the South. The plantations that we see in the deep South and this new expanding area, especially down in Alabama and Mississippi, that is all growing cotton now. And cotton does not deplete the soil like tobacco does. All cotton really needs, if you zoom out a lot, is land and hands. We need people to actually take these cotton gins and actually clean out the cotton to then be made into usable yarn. And we need a lot of space to grow a lot of plantations. The South has a bunch of those. And so what we are seeing is that the South is manifesting differently. They are not at all impoverished. The South is making money hand over fist because this cotton is the utter key to the textile industry, both in the North with these new factories and to the British textile industry overseas. So really, The cotton industry is white gold, as they describe it. They are the absolute key to the economy of the North and the South and Britain's textile industry. And by extension, slave labor is the key to all of those things at the same time. A sad but true fact at this point in time. So, what else do we see here? The South is going to be a place where they are also far more spread out, whereas the North is starting to urbanize as those major industrial centers are making more people actually have to go to cities to get a job. The South is spreading out. These plantations are very rural. So many people are spread out, and there are not a lot of major cities. The one exception being the very tail end of this railroad map down there, New Orleans, because it is the gateway to the Mississippi, which you can now go two ways thanks to these steamboats. On the same time, the actual hierarchy of the planter class, the slave owning populations, does show the South, despite their own values, is actually not at all an egalitarian place. It is an elitist place, as we've seen before. There are about 10 to 15% of the slave owning class of families own over 20 slaves, which, just to put that in perspective here, that is a very small minority, but that means that they have the vast economic weight. This is the ruling class of the South, this planter gentry class, and they are going to be the ones who decide what goes on in politics. And so, really, that manifests a lot of different ways. There was a split over the role of slavery regarding the Whig Party. We saw the conscience Whigs and the cotton Whigs. There are plenty of cotton Whigs down in the South on top of Southern Democrats. But these planters, they decide what goes on politically in the South. And anything that might possibly threaten slavery is going to be swiftly dealt with and is hostily opposed. And so, on that note, let's kind of shift gears and take a look at more of the social side to the institution of slavery. Now, we went into a lot of detail in this about a lot of the really ugly sides to this area here. But just to kind of sum up for this video here, we saw that the South considers it to be a kind of paternalistic take, that effectively these Southern planters, these slave owners, they know what's best for these massive populations of enslaved people. They insist that they are simply providing for their basic needs, that slaves actually benefit from being enslaved because, look, they can't take care of themselves. So us, the benevolent slave owners, despite having to discipline them every now and then, they are always taken care of. They are learning the proper language of English, and that they are learning the proper religion of Christianity. So this argument here is being perpetuated throughout the South, and it's best summed up by the idea that Calhoun said that slavery is a positive good. It's not just something we tolerate, it is something the South actively straight up endorses. And he's even going to go further to criticize the North, saying that they're the real brutal ones. Why would you succumb to capitalism and force all these ordinary people into wage slavery? Because they have to work every day, and if they don't, then they lose their basic amenities like the house or food. Meanwhile, without worrying about wage labor, the noble Southern slave owners, detect the sarcasm here, they are taking care of any economic woes. No enslaved person ever has to worry about economic woes. That's the argument that they're proposing right now. But the reality is quite different. We see that there's many arbitrary guidelines here, like this woman here that we showed, this woman named Louisa here. That toddler is her owner because that toddler's parents died. And it's utterly foreign. And they realize that. The brutality, the routine whippings, the dehumanization, there are countless examples here to basically enforce the idea that enslaved people are not human, and to enforce the idea that the slave owners will then not think of them as human. The system was just built on perpetuating fear. Now, the revisionists are going to argue that this was just the natural order of things, and that a few of them, white supremacists, are going to argue that it was an active, great good. But The irreconcilables are going to argue that many enslaved people were fully aware that this was not a natural way of living. And as a result, they're going to actively resist slavery in any way that they can. And so the enslaved people, there was plenty of ways that they could resist. Many of them were more passive than they were active because to actively resist, like a full-blown rebellion, was dangerous and would almost certainly result in death. So what did they do? We see that there are a couple ways. For example, many enslaved people had Christian names, and they would have to use those in the presence of the white slave owners. But whenever they got time to themselves, they would often refer to each other by West African names and speak in the West African languages that they used to use, basically keeping those languages and cultures alive ever so slightly. We see that they promote music from the old land, and part of it involves actually the banjo. Fun fact. Uh, we do see that many enslaved people have been forced to convert to Christianity or have just been raised with those words. And we see that the Southern sermons, they are very paternalistic. The idea here that your masters know what's best for you, and if you ever disobey them, you're committing a sin and you'll go to hell. Or, thievery is wrong, and if you ever steal from, I don't know, your masters, you're going to hell. Nonetheless, many enslaved people had their own churches and own denominations. And so what we see is that there is plenty of people who are going to create their own doctrines and kind of their own takes on it. And in particular, many enslaved churches are going to focus on characters more like Moses, like the idea of some individual person delivering them to the promised land, a holy exodus, if you will. More on that in a sec. Or the idea of David being able to topple Goliath and therefore showing that they too may be able to one day persevere against a superior in strength opponent. Now, there are plenty of examples of passive resistance too, where basically many enslaved people would commit this on a daily basis. They would slow down their work so that they could ever so slightly make their masters poorer. They would break tools. They would lose them entirely. They would steal the actual shipments for the day of cotton and hide them, or set the storehouses ablaze. They would, some cases, sabotage themselves so that they couldn't work and therefore be part of the system. Well, that might involve breaking one's own limbs so that they can't actually work the fields that day, or stick their hands in a beehive and therefore have swollen hands and also can't work. Uh, any types of actual active resistance like that, rather than a full-blown rebellion, there oftentimes was attempts to just simply run away. So we saw the Underground Railroad in this unit here, Harriet Tubman, aka Moses. Fun fact, the code name that she used. We see that many people would try to flee to safety, and a good many do try to escape to the north and therefore to a free area where they could possibly set up a new life. Um, in some cases, there's a case of the Amistad, where this was actually West African enslaved people who were actually able to kill the crew of the slave ship that they were being transported on and actually flee to the U.S. for amnesty. And the Supreme Court actually grants them amnesty. So they're actually able to escape that way. But, anyways, what this shows is that full-blown resistance by enslaved people in a bloody sense was very rare. There are two notable exceptions, though. One, Denmark Vesey, who actually didn't even really do anything. The proof is shady, but he was captured and executed on suspicion of plotting a slave revolt among his former enslaved plantation in South Carolina. But the big one is going to be Nat Turner. We see that he's going to be a very religious man, a Christian man, and he believes that God has chosen him to lead his people to freedom. So he causes a revolt, and 53 white people are going to be killed over multiple plantations. And this is going to absolutely petrify the South. They do not want this idea to ever appear again. And so what they're going to do is, well, one, they're going to put down the rebellion. Nat Turner and a few others are going to be executed. But they're going to punish this severely with increasing anti-slavery laws, incredible punishments, effectively a brutal crackdown across the entire South because they don't want anyone to get the idea that this is even a little bit permissible. Otherwise, we have a full-blown Haitian Revolution on our hands when all the slave owners are going to be executed. So this terrifies the South. But in turn, every crack of the whip, every brutality is then it's going to be used as ammunition for the North with its own abolitionist cause. Another example of how slavery is a sin, is a moral wrong, and should be stopped. And now, on that note, what we see in my irreconcilable POV is the idea here that the South is going to become paranoid. They're going to start to see Nat Turner and the reaction to it as a sign that the whole North is on board with the cause of abolition. We see that there's now growing disturbing movements, these reform movements like feminism, like abolition, like all these beliefs here that the North is unified behind the idea. And again, you can very much make the case that they are not at all unified yet, that these are just dangerous radicals. But the South is interpreting it that way. And so they start to see it as the South is in danger. The North is coming to take away your private property of enslaved people. And with that, there goes our entire way of life. And so eventually, the South is going to start to believe that the country no longer speaks for them and their interests, that the North is just too different than the South. And if that's the case, why are we even trying to keep this union together? If we are so different, maybe the South should just walk away and create their own new union based on their own unique values. All right. So that's the end of Unit 4 right there. Unit 5 is going to cover the idea of the Civil War, the lead up to it, and kind of the aftermath of the Reconstruction era. But for now, the stage has been set. All right. We'll go ahead and wrap it up there for right now. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this was useful. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.